Hi everyone, William here with the 1908 Grand Duke Dmitri Diary series. At the moment we're doing a series of letters, actually, not diary entries, that Dmitri wrote to his sister in 1908. His sister who'd been married since the spring and was living in Sweden. Okay, so the last letter that we did, the previous video, was 17th of September. And it was news of Maria's pregnancy. Dmitri was finishing up his stay in the Crimea at that time, and he, through Aunt Ella, had gotten news of Maria's pregnancy, and he was really overjoyed about that and wrote her a letter to tell her how excited he was and to compliment her by saying that now she was not just a princess, a knyagina, but a great princess, a velikaya knyagina. Okay, so we should be able to get through today's letter. It's no longer from the Crimea, it's from Petersburg, 3rd October 1908, so we're a few weeks advanced. It looks like they were writing each other every couple of weeks. And sorry about the sniffing, I've got some allergies going on today with spring on the way, and I was really appalled yesterday when I saw the lighting, when I watched yesterday's video back. I don't always watch them on YouTube. Sometimes I watch them on my the original recording on my phone before I upload it, but I didn't this time, and I looked on YouTube and I saw how bad the lighting was, and also the focus seemed to be off, so I hope it hasn't been that way in general. Anyway, I don't want to interrupt things. Yeah, Petersburg, 1908, 3rd October. My God, Maria, how strange to be writing you from my old rooms in Petersburg. Back again returned to that old familiar place. With Auntie's much needed help, my rooms have turned out to be very well arranged and cozy. There's a small dining room in the same place as before, then a living room, then a study with my old red upholstery from Moscow, then a bedroom, and finally, instead of Zhdanov sleeping next to me, there is my desk. The blue upholstery in the living room is very beautiful, and the furniture is from your room. Crispin! My housewarming was celebrated with a huge procession. There was a prayer service in our church, then a big tea. Auntie is terribly kind to me. She's become more cheerful and doesn't get angry at all now when I let myself joke about her monastery. Poor Dolinsky has gotten terribly thin. Crispin, sorry. The poor man seems to have tried, at least in his own way, to improve things. I've already been to the theater a few times. I miss you awfully, and sometimes I feel really uncomfortable when uninvited images of the past year creep into my head. And I remember when we used to go together to adore the Vladimirovichi. Incidentally, I've been flirting with a very beautiful and young lady-in-waiting, Mademoiselle Blank, there at the Vladimirovich's at their place. She's very sweet and lively. Well, my impressions of the Crimea were of the best. I was very pleased with it. And now I give you and your husband a big hug. I hope you're feeling well, Dmitri. Okay, charming letter, and I'm awfully sorry about my little dog. I'm just glad he stopped. Sometimes when he starts barking, he just keeps barking for a long time. Okay, where is Dmitri, what building is Dmitri talking about? I feel a little bit of confusion about that because he ultimately settled in the Belozerskaya Dvorca, Grand Duke Sergei's palace that he inherited on the Neva River in St. Petersburg. But in this instance, he seems to be talking about the palace where he and Maria lived as children. So that would have been Paul's palace, and I didn't do any research on the palaces, so I don't know what it was called. But if you recall, back in the summer when he was with Ella in Gapsal, the plan was for him to move in with Grand Duke Alexei, Uncle Alexei. But that seems not to have worked out. At this particular time, Alexei was in Paris, and he was not doing well. He was in very poor health, and he would in fact die in November. And so that plan was definitely off. So for the moment, at least, Dmitri's old childhood rooms apparently had been fixed up for him. He was 10, I think, just short of his 11th birthday when he and Maria moved to Moscow to live with Sergei and Ella. So it's a bit odd that he would have had his own rooms, his own apartment, I should say, and Maria had her own apartment. It's a bit odd because they, you think of the nursery primarily, and that was the year they stopped having a nanny. Nanny Fry left them, and they started having their tutor, their not tutor, but vaspitatel. There's no good word for that in English. Governor, I guess you would say, and Maria had her governess. But anyway, we find out he had his own little apartment, and it is quite small and modest, seemingly. Dmitri absolutely adored furniture. You've heard about that before, both in his post-Russia life and even as a teenager. He went behind Ella's back at one point and bought furniture on his own, and she was quite angry at him. But anyway, he hasn't obviously gone on a spending spree here. Maybe Ella had something to do with that. In his study, he's got the upholstery from Moscow. And in his living room, he's got Maria's furniture, possibly reupholstered, because he talks about the upholstery. So yeah, but he's quite happy. And Dmitri always puts, when he talks about a place where he's living, always puts emphasis on coziness. He uses that word, uyutna, in Russian for cozy. He uses that constantly. When it comes to actually, day-to-day life, he clearly prefers something to be cozy rather than grand. And in fact, I understand that. I've never lived in a palace, obviously, but you may already know that every year I go and live in an empty hotel for a few months in Switzerland, in Davos. And, when I first started doing that, I thought, wow, I'm going to take advantage of this whole big place. During the mid-season, it's closed, and there's only a skeleton staff, and they're all gone by 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And I was thinking, yeah, I'm going to be very expansive. But, you don't end up being very expansive. At least I didn't, because you have your cozy room, and you just don't end up going from place to place. Even if you had servants, which I don't, obviously, you still have to move things from room to room, and you have to walk, and it adds up, the amount of walking and stairs going up and down. And so it's not really surprising that, at least in Dmitri's case, maybe with other members of the imperial family as well, they had an apartment. It wasn't necessarily a big apartment, and that was where they lived, in the palace. In fact, during the First World War, Dmitri would turn over the whole ground floor of his palace to an English woman to put in a hospital for Russian soldiers. And yeah, and he had no problem doing that. It wasn't like he was using the space. Anyway, I am digressing. We find out, which is not a surprise at all, one would have guessed it anyway, that a man, a servant, slept next to him in his room when he was a child, and that may indeed have continued on when he moved to Moscow. It was a common practice then, not only in royal households, but in aristocratic households, to have the children's primary male or, not their primary caregiver, that would have been Laming, who had his own apartment, but a servant attached to them sleep actually in a bed next to theirs. And, I guess to make sure that they went to sleep and, didn't read comic books under the blankets. I'm joking, of course. And an even bigger issue was, let us say, self-pleasure, because the Victorians had an absolute dread of that. They thought it was one of the worst sins you could commit, and it would destroy your body and your mental health. And so, you've probably all seen these horrific devices that they sometimes use so that children couldn't indulge at that at night. And so, again, that was probably, unfortunately, one of the reasons why you would have a servant sleep in the room with the child, whether a boy or a girl. So now, in the place where Zhdanov's, and I don't know anything else about him, but in the place where his bed was, now Dmitri has his desk. So that's nice. Yeah, then we have this formal occasion. Very unusual for Dmitri. He never talks in his diaries or his letters. From 1908 on through 1915, he never talks about having grand occasions at his residence. But this time, Ella is obviously involved, so they have this procession, Dmitri calls it. They go into the church and pray, and undoubtedly part of the procession was involving a priest or priest blessing the rooms. And then they have this, Dmitri calls it a big tea or a big tea party. So he doesn't mention who was invited. Yeah, okay. Another interesting thing about this letter is he had, as some of you know, as an adolescent, a very rocky relationship with Ella. They later, became very fond of each other and got along very well. But when he was a teenager, he tended to think of her as liking Maria better. And he and she had lots of clashes. She was very strict. And yeah, one of the biggest things that he was concerned about when Maria became engaged was that how was he going to handle Aunt Ella in her absence, because he'd never gotten along well with her. But we see that there's this big improvement, and he makes note of it. Things are going great with her. She's treating him well. She's helping him arrange his apartment so that it's really nice. So that's nice. That's a nice development. And also the fact that now he feels like he can joke with her. Apparently in the past, when he joked about her monastery or her being a nun, it did not go over well. It made her angry. I don't know what kind of a temper she had, but Dmitri loved to play the clown, and he was sometimes a little too much on the sarcastic end of the register when it came to humor. But now she's learned that that's just Dmitri, and she's handling it. There may have been a little bit of resentment, because he does mention here and there in his diary entries and letters, resenting a bit that Ella spent so much time with her wounded soldiers who were learning a trade, and with her nuns. And so, he may have been a little too sarcastic, and there may have been kind of a cutting edge with his jokes, but at least now things are better. So Dolensky, I don't know who this was. I assume probably an old butler who hadn't had much to do since Paul left Russia and the children moved to Moscow. But he's still there. He hasn't been let go. Sounds like he's not in very good health. I don't know if he was actually an elderly person, but anyway, he's sort of wasting away. He's gotten terribly thin, Dmitri says, but he's been trying to make things nice at the palace. So again, a nice thing. This is a very positive letter. Dmitri absolutely adored the theater wherever he was. He went to the theater as often as possible. So not surprising that he'd done that. Also not surprising that he talks about, even before he got into the New Thought techniques and things like that, he already is a person, he has a tendency to depression, anxiety, and so, it's important for him to control his memories and what he allows to he seems to have sometimes thought about things a little bit obsessively. So maybe at some point someone had taught him how to, not dwell on things. I think that's what he means. I mean, I could be wrong. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but judging from other things that he wrote, I get the impression that that was the case. Now, the funniest thing in this in this letter is this. Well, this is him being sarcastic, that he and Maria had gone to worship, gone to adore, gone to pay homage to the Vladimirovichi when they were both living in Tsarskaya Selo before she got married. So, and indeed, he will talk in other letters to her about how the Boris and Andre, at least, especially Andre, were important. They kind of, when Maria, Maria and Dmitri had been isolated from the rest of the family. And when they moved back to Petersburg and Tsarskaya, well, Maria quickly married, and Maria Pavlovna, the elder, kind of took them under her wing, and the brothers did too, which was nice. He doesn't really talk about Uncle Vladimir, but Maria Pavlovna and the brothers, yeah, they really made an effort to integrate Dmitri and Maria into family life and into society. And so, yeah, Dmitri here sarcastically, yes, we went to pay our homage to them. So he's still going. And he's flirting when he's there. He's flirting with one of Maria Pavlovna's Aunt Mishin's ladies in waiting. She's young and she's beautiful. That's a bit odd for Dmitri. He didn't tend to like young ladies. In fact, at one point in his diaries, he even specifically says young ladies are not my cup of tea. But anyway, in this instance, she's pretty. Why not? He's over there. Maybe it's a little boring sometimes. So he's flirting with this very sweet and lively girl. And, obviously not, it's nothing serious, obviously. Okay, so ends the letter by saying, hope you're feeling well. That's, a way of saying, I hope the pregnancy's going well, I guess. I hope you're not nauseous or anything like that. Nauseated, I should say. What do we have next time? Well, next time we have a November letter, and Alexei has actually died, and Paul has come to Russia. And yeah, the brothers would start dying off. I think Vladimir would die in 1909. But Paul would be allowed to come to Russia because of his brother's death, even though the brother had died in Paris. The body was brought to Russia. Paul was allowed to come. Dmitri will have some interesting things to say about that. He will also call his sister a pig. And so, in a joking way, of course, Dmitri being Dmitri. So we will find out what brought that on. And yeah, I hope to see you then. Bye.